Welcome to the Dianne Show, where theory and action collide. Today, we have a very special show with the nominees for the inaugural Nobel Prize in Adult Education. Please welcome Lev Vygotsky, Alan Tuff, and Paulo Freire, experts in the field of adult education. When we think of education, many of us envision a traditional behaviorist approach to learning within a formal setting. The teacher is viewed as an expert depositing knowledge into the minds of passive learners. However, today we are going to look at education from a different perspective. We are going to consider informal learning. That is unstructured, uncredentialed, spontaneous learning that occurs during daily activities. Our experts will share how they utilize the purpose and goals of adult education to teach outside of the formal classroom. First up tonight, Lev Vygotsky. Lev, how does your theoretical perspective support the purpose and goals of adult education?
Thanks, Diane. It's good to be here tonight. Excuse me, if you will. I have a bad cough. I want to start by saying that while the topic up for discussion this evening is adult education principles and the utilization of informal learning outside the classroom, some may feel that my work, primarily with children, is perhaps misplaced in this dialogue. I want to identify that the application of tenets of my social cognition learning theory lends itself to the principles of adult education very readily. There is an overlap between constructivist and social constructive approaches. The mitigating factor, as I see it, is that in a social constructivist model, learners require a person who already has this ability knowledge and is willing to teach alongside the learner. The teacher, who I will now refer to as the most knowledgeable other, or MKO, pulls the learner along with them in an effort to increase the learner's knowledge, skills, abilities. This is as opposed to constructivism, which is solely based on the internal learning development of the individual. The culture in which the learner exists also provides support and cues that learning needs to occur. This happens through social interaction with the MKO. The MKO may model behaviors and/or provide verbal instructions for the learner. This is referred to as cooperative or collaborative dialogue. I apologize. I have this silly cough that will not go away. To continue, the learner seeks to understand the actions or instructions provided by the MKO, then internalizes the information, using it to guide or regulate their own performance. An integral part of social cognitive learning theory is the application of knowledge for learners through a peer or social context. Now, I would suggest to you that you cannot go learning something that is not within your purview without the appropriate foundation. So I identified that the learning occurs within the ZPD, or Zone of Proximal Development. This is a range where tasks are within the learner's cognitive ability to learn. The instructions for the learner is not too difficult, but just exceeds the learner's current level of skills and abilities. The learner still requires assistance to complete the learning, ergo the necessary involvement of the MKO. The acquisition of new skills is not completed through absorption, but rather a constructive process of learning and participating in the new skill. You may be familiar with the term scaffolding. Although I did not come up with this particular terminology, I like what it represents. It refers to the concept of building on previous knowledge, and the MKO adjusts the support needed to the learner. And, as learning continues, the MKO pulls back on instructions and provides a more supportive yet less direct role.
That is a very interesting perspective, Lev, especially the concept of the zone of proximal development. Alan Tuff, are you in agreement with Lev Vygotsky, or do you envision a different goal for adult education?
Firstly, Diane, thank you for inviting me to your show. I've done many conferences and written some books, but this is a first for me. It's a pleasure to be here. To answer your question, humans have the potential for growth and development, so I believe that the purpose of adult education is to guide learners in their learning. As adult educators, I find we often ignore informal learning even though it is so deeply embedded in our everyday lives that we don't even notice we're learning. For my PhD thesis, I studied a fascinating subject: learners learning about something on their own. However, what I discovered through interviews is that informal learning is actually a social phenomenon. We found that to complete a learning project, the adults sourced about 10 people for input, direction, or clarification. My team and I also realized that people have a knack for planning their learning. Almost all informal learners perform the preparatory steps as self-learners. This means the learner makes most of the decisions, even if they seek information or advice from others, such as professors, neighbors, friends, etc.
Fascinating. Paulo Freire, what are your thoughts?
I was imprisoned for 70 days as a traitor in Brazil and lived in exile for 15 years due to the radical nature of my ideas and my willingness to critically question the dominant socially held views. Based on my work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and my mass literacy campaigns for Latin American education, I proposed a critical theory perspective towards adult education. Living among the poor, rural families and laborers, my experiences highlighted the relationship between socioeconomic class and education. I encourage the development of critical consciousness, which permits individuals to question the nature of their historical and social situation, as well as take action against the oppressive forces that are recognized through this problem-posing process. I consider the purpose of adult education to be a social change and liberation from oppression. It is through critical questioning combined with action that leads to social change. For example, dialogue is a problem-posing approach that uses questions to advance critical thinking. This includes an awareness of the social forces that influence our lives. During this problem-posing approach, the teacher and learner interact on a horizontal rather than hierarchical plane. Together, they learn, question, reflect, and create meaning. It is through this process that we gain an awareness of the social forces that are directing our lives.
Wow, you have each presented a very unique view in relation to the purpose and goals of adult education. With such varying concepts, it is hard to envision how each of your theories can be applied to real life. Before the show, I had my favorite movie of all times about adult education, Good Will Hunting, playing in the green room while our panel of experts were waiting. This movie sparked an interesting discussion as each theorist identified a scene within the movie representative of their theoretical perspective on informal adult education. Let's start with the clip selected by Lev Vygotsky. Lead us into it, Lev.
The characters of Will and Sean participate in a relationship that is at first unequal and fraught with power struggles. I believe it is the intent of the screenwriters to portray a classic example of ZPD and scaffolding and learning with these two individuals. Sean, who I would identify as the MKO, and Will, that of the learner, proceed through sessions of therapy which were originally intended to socialize or acclimatize Will as a requisite part of his probation. However, as the story proceeds, we see that the MKO, Sean, also begins to learn about himself and his behaviors in tandem with Will and Will's life-altering breakthroughs. The journey of the two men, both learning something from each other, provides the basis for an almost symbiotic social exchange. I attribute this to Sean understanding Will's ZPD, helping him work within it, scaffolding on each new experience until, at the end of the story, the MKO is now also learning alongside his student, and the deed is done.
Want to read? Why? Have you had any experience with that?
20 years of counseling. Yeah, I've seen some pretty awful shit.
I mean, have you had any experience with that?
Personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Sure ain't good.
My father was an alcoholic. Mean fucking drunk. He'd come home hammered, looking to wail on somebody. So I'd provoke him so he wouldn't go after my mother and little brother. Interesting nights were when he wore his rings.
He used to just put a wrench, a stick, and a belt on the table and just say choose.
Well, I gotta go with the belt there, Vanna.
I used to go with the wrench.
Why the wrench?
Because fuck him, that's why.
Your foster father.
Yeah. So, you know, what is it, like, Will has an attachment disorder? Is it all that stuff? Fear of abandonment? Is that why I broke up with Skylar?
I didn't know you had.
I did.
You wanna talk about it?
No.
Hey, Will. I don't know a lot. You see this? All this shit. This is not your fault. Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
No, you don't. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
All right.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault.
Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Very fascinating, Lev. I, however, have a different scene from the movie I would like to share with the audience. Self-directed learning is like a personal adventure. Of course, we can assist the learner in clarifying goals and finding resources, but if we set them free, they will learn enthusiastically. In the Good Will Hunting film, it starts with Will as a self-learner, reading books. As the film continues, Will begins studying math with a professor. In the following scene, you will notice the professor is impressed with Will's application of a certain theorist. As Will has never formally studied, he answers, "Yeah, I don't know what you call it."
Most people never get to see how brilliant they can be. They don't find teachers who believe in them. They get convinced they're stupid. I hope you appreciate what he's doing, because I've seen how much he enjoys working with you, not against you.
Hello, Will. Tom, could you get us some coffee?
Sure.
Let's see. Good. This is correct. You can see you used McLaurin here.
Yeah, I don't know what to call it, but
This can't be right. It would be very embarrassing. Did you ever consider...
I'm pretty sure it's right. Hey, look, can we do this at Sean's office from now on? Because I gotta knock off work to come here, and the commute is killing me.
Yeah, sure. But did you think of the possibility...
That's right.
While you have both shared pertinent learning moments from the movie, it is imperative to recognize the oppressive forces which influence education. In this scene from the movie, Sean uses a problem-posing approach to encourage Will to engage in critical thinking and the development of critical consciousness. We get a glimpse of critical reflection on the oppressive forces that limit Will's learning, primarily socioeconomic status, which restricts how he experiences the world and the type of knowledge he possesses. Also, we are shown how belonging to a particular group such as being an orphan, does not define our identity.
You've never been out of Boston?
Nope.
So if I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo. I know a lot about him. Life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientation, the whole works, right? I bet you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at that beautiful ceiling. Seen that. If I ask you about women, you'd probably give me a syllabus of your personal favorites. You may have even been laid a few times. But you can't tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and feel truly happy. You're a tough kid. I ask you about war, you'd probably throw Shakespeare at me, right? Once more into the breach, dear friends. But you've never been near one. You've never held your best friend's head in your lap and watch him gasp his last breath looking to you for help. I ask you about love, you'd probably quote me a sonnet. But you've never looked at a woman and been totally vulnerable. Known someone that could level you with her eyes. Feeling like God put an angel on earth just for you. Who could rescue you from the depths of hell. And you wouldn't know what it's like to be her angel. To have that love for her be there forever. Through anything. Through cancer. And you would know about sleeping sitting up in a hospital room for 2 months, holding her hand, because the doctors could see in your eyes that the terms visiting hours don't apply to you. You don't know about real loss, because that only occurs when you love something more than you love yourself. I doubt you've ever dared to love anybody that much. You're an orphan, right? Do you think I'd know the first thing about how hard your life has been? How you feel? Who you are? Because I read Oliver Twist? Does that encapsulate you?
It is interesting how this movie can represent all three perspectives on adult informal education. Yet, I think the audience would like to know how we can apply this to real life. Lev, what are your thoughts on ways we can continue to teach outside a controlled classroom?
We are surrounded by examples of informal learning based on ZPD and scaffolding. One only has to look to the sharing of cultural traditions. There is no classroom, no grading, and no formalization of the learning when experiencing your culture, be it from your direct family or from the community at large. An excellent example of this is the indigenous peoples of countries all over the world who have traditional means of living off the land, fishing, spiritual beliefs, and practice. As the learner grows, an MKO will assist them with their knowledge gaining until they're able to step forward as a learned one themselves.
How do I encourage learning outside of the classroom? The activities would depend on the learner, but the web fits beautifully into informal learning. It has such a huge potential for learners. Also, traveling is phenomenal, such as nursing students traveling to Peru to care for the people. But so are joining activities, such as book clubs. A learner can also learn from people, television, casual reading, entertainment, and work. For instance, Will worked at MIT so he could learn more about math.
Outside the formal classroom, I try to engage learners in experiential activities that offer a vision of what it could be if less oppressive ways of knowing existed. I encourage learners to participate in group discussions, journaling, and debriefing. These learning strategies offer opportunities to question our assumptions and examine the oppressive forces that influence our lives. As I stated earlier, the goal of adult learning is social change. For this to occur, the key elements are experience, critical reflection, reflective discourse, and action.
Thank you, Lev, Alan, and Paolo for your enlightening comments. I congratulate all of you on your nominations for the Nobel Prize in Adult Education. That's all of the time we have for today. Tune in tomorrow as Stephen Brookfield will be here to discuss the political nature of self-directed learning. Until then, check out the Dianne Show Outtakes discussion forum for more on adult learning in an informal setting.